Jumbo, assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I'm Lou House here with Bill Greaves, welcoming you to another edition of Black Journal. Tonight, Black Journal takes a long, hard look at South Africa, the problems that our people face there, and the efforts they're making toward liberation. We have with us several brothers from South Africa to bring us up to date about what's happening as far as black resistance is concerned.
And from the Afro-American point of view, we'll get some ideas on how the South African situation affects black people in this country, what its implications are for the United States internationally.
The film you will see tonight was made in South Africa during 1963 and 1964. Much of the footage has been smuggled out of South Africa. It is a film that can never be done again, and unfortunately has not become dated, as the South Africa police state persists and it worsens.
At a time when white rule has ended on most of the African continent and black African nationalism has emerged as the dominant force in a bloc of independent African states, the Republic of South Africa has become an isolated bastion of white nationalism, a police state based on racism. Long before the first whites arrived, black people were spread throughout the subcontinent. There existed the flourishing societies of the Hoi, Batwa, Xhosa, and Zulu peoples. Of the 17 million people in South Africa, about 1 out of 5 is white. Most of the non-white are indigenous black Africans. The government refers to them as Bantu. Other non-whites include people of mixed blood called coloreds and a small number of Asians. Whites in South Africa appear to live in constant fear of the African, the so-called black danger. They fear the latent power of black unity. To avoid having to think about the danger any more than necessary, the whites rely upon the suppressive policy of apartheid, a scheme which purports to separate people of different colors in order that they will develop, in theory, along parallel lines in their own areas. But in actual fact, this policy means the debasement of non-white population through an endless series of laws and regulations based upon the notion that the black man, at least when his services are not required, is to be kept out of sight. African freedom of movement and employment is controlled by pass laws. The African is required to carry a pass book at all times. It must be signed once every week by his boss. If he is caught without his pass, he discovers that he has broken the law and order. He can then be put in jail or fined or endorsed out. That is, sent to a so-called rural homeland he may never have seen. 700,000 arrests are made annually for pass law violations, and 80,000 Africans are endorsed out. It is not just Africans who must carry identification papers. Since August 1st, 1966, every person, including whites, over 18 years of age in South Africa have been required to carry a card. At present, it is only the African who is stopped by the police and asked to produce his pass. His passbook must contain particulars about every job he has had, every tax he has paid, and every x-ray he has taken. Vast, monotonous black ghettos called townships ring all the large cities of South Africa. This township is located 15 miles from downtown Johannesburg to ensure maximum separation for the white population. From here, Africans commute to jobs in the mines, industrial plants, and other employment, all created for the white man's prosperity. During the day, Africans are welcome to spend their money and work in the central section of the city, but before dark, these men must be off the streets and back in their townships. By classifying all urban Africans as temporary migrants, the government claims it is justified in depriving them of social and political rights in urban areas. The final solution of the white South African government is the relocation of all black Africans in self-governing homelands according to a long-range separate development plan brought out in 1955. There would ultimately be 7 quasi-independent black territories called Bantustans, one for each major tribe or group of tribes. The final solution would lead to a situation where black Africans live on or control 13% of the land, while the other 87% of South African land would go to the white minority. The so-called white state is a continuous land area which happens to contain all the large cities, the seaports, the harbors, the airfields, gold mines, coal mines, as well as the best and most fertile farmlands. The so-called Bantu homelands, or Bantustans, consist of 260 small and separate areas scattered throughout the country. They are rural slums. They have no cities, no industries, and few sources of employment. The showcase of separate development is the Transkei, an area about 1/3 the size of the state of Louisiana. It is the homeland of the nearly 1.5 million members of the Xhosa tribe. The rights of the Transkei citizens are limited. He may live in a white territory if he works for the white man and if he pays taxes, but he may have virtually no say whatsoever in the government that rules him. In the Transkei, he can vote for a legislative assembly in which 64 white-appointed chiefs overrule the wishes of the 45 elected members. The chiefs can generally be relied upon to toe the government line because they are officials of the Republic's government, responsible to that government and not to the Transkeian citizens. Nat Nakasa is a young journalist who left South Africa to come to the United States on a one-way ticket. He has frequently visited the Transkei and studied its problems.
The people of the Transkei did not ask for self-rule, such as has been given to them by the government. This alone is an indication that this is in fact an imposition. Government of South Africa, and this is the only government there really is in South Africa, retains the power, the authority to reject or nullify any legislation which the supposed government of the Transkei produces. None of the legislation that the Transkeian government produces from its House of Assembly can become law without the approval of the government. He's using the Transkei to placate world feeling. His whole apartheid policy stands or falls by the success of the Transkei. The Transkei is intended to serve as an excuse for the government to do whatever it pleases with Africans who are supposedly Transkeian Africans. And each time that the government makes further inroads on their rights, it will have this delightful excuse that, after all, they've got their country.
Considering the unique importance the government attaches to the Transkei, it is doing very little to assist in its development. The Komata irrigation scheme with its impressive Lubisi Dam has been internationally advertised. This scheme will assist in agricultural development, but it will not supply power for industry. Transkei industry, the white South African version of black capitalism, is limited to a furniture factory and a few other small plants. Cheap labor is still the main export. No advances have been made towards the political or economic development of the other 7 Bantustans. Indeed, it is illegal to use white capital to develop them, and the local inhabitants hardly have the resources to do it themselves. Some of the proposed Bantustans are not even to be geographically consolidated. The Zuluistan, for example, will consist of dozens of separate plots of land over a wide area with rich white farming land left intact between. It is now probable that the Transkei will be granted so-called full independence sometime in the next decade. And if that experiment is successful, further states will follow until a veritable commonwealth of economically dependent micro-states is created in and around white South Africa. Diamonds mark the beginning of South Africa's capital formation and industrial development. The wealth from diamonds led to the financing, exploration, and exploitation of gold mines. 90% of all South African mine workers are non-whites, but few of this majority have good jobs. Some of them work above ground on a permanent basis as personnel assistants, but the government has imposed limitations upon the numbers who may be thus employed. Underground at the mines, the highest rank an African can achieve is that of boss boy. Out of South Africa's gold mines come 70% of the free world's gold. Glittering profits are made possible by an ample supply of African workers who can do little to improve their lot. They are prohibited from striking, and if they cause trouble, can be tried and shipped out of town. South African mining has attracted more U.S. capital than any other industry. The high profits earned on U.S. investments in South Africa depend upon low wages imposed by apartheid. For example, the most important profit factors in mining are the quality of the ore and the cost of the labor to extract it. South Africa's all-white Chamber of Mines therefore simply sets the wages of black miners low enough to make profitable the mining of even low-grade ore and relatively inaccessible ore. A rough breakdown of annual wages is as follows. Whites, $3,587, coloreds and Asians, $636, and Africans, $213, plus board and room. The nerve center of South Africa's booming economy is the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Here the investor may expect a good return on his money. There is no longer any poor white class in South Africa. It is one of the last countries where the get-rich-quick dreams can still be realized. That is, if you are white. Already, U.S. businessmen have invested more than $1 billion in South Africa, and their investment there is increasing faster than in any other country in the world. The largest chain of vacation hotels will shortly be none other than Holiday Inns. Chase Manhattan Bank and First National City Bank continue to expand steadily. A partial list of U.S. firms with significant investment interest and subsidiaries in South Africa reads like a Chamber of Commerce directory. IBM, Kellogg Company, Eastman Kodak, Ford Motor Company, U.S. Rubber Company, Hertz, City Service, Tampex Incorporated, General Motors, Squibb, Caterpillar Company, Procter & Gamble, Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, New Mount Mining, Coca-Cola, Alice Chalmers. U.S. economic policy on South Africa flaunts numerous UN resolutions. In November 1963, 84 members of the UN voted for a resolution which urged all states to refrain especially from the supply in any manner or form of any petroleum or petroleum products to South Africa. Only 6 countries voted against this resolution. The United States led the vote. Economic pressure of this type is by no means inconsistent with the U.S. foreign policy for varying reasons. The United States presently boycotts and embargoes countries in which over a third of the world's population lives. Yet it has been unwilling to go beyond a ban on arms and ammunition to implement UN resolutions against apartheid. One reason given by the United States for refusing to put economic pressure on South Africa is that it would hurt the very Africans it was designed to help by making them even poorer. But spokesmen for the black African majority say that outside economic pressure is the only remaining weapon short of bloodshed, and are themselves the strongest advocates of a boycott of their own country. The South African government's principle of white rule faces the resolute opposition of the indigenous black African majority. African nationalism has been organized and active on a countrywide basis for over 50 years. It was the pass laws which triggered the infamous Sharpeville massacre, the turning point in South African destiny. On March 21st, 1960, a crowd of unarmed Africans assembled at the police station in the town of Sharpeville near Johannesburg to demonstrate against the hated pass laws. The police panicked and opened fire. 72 Africans were killed, 186 wounded. After Sharpeville, instead of easing the pressures which caused the explosion, the government took the opposite course. Sharpeville became an excuse to slap down African nationalism with all the full force of legal powers and armed might. An emergency was declared, and the infamous 90-day law was enacted. This law made it possible for people to be held merely on suspicion. The original 90-day detention could be renewed indefinitely without a trial. Effective police state measures have brought about temporary tranquility, at least on the surface. The 90-day law has been temporarily suspended, although it can be brought back into force at a moment's notice. The government has outlawed the two major African political parties. The ANC, African National Congress, has been in existence for over 50 years. The PAC, Pan-Africanist Congress, founded in 1959, led the Sharpeville protest. Today, the leaders of both parties have been jailed, driven underground, or in exile. The late Chief Albert Luthuli is the patriarch of the freedom movement, a lifelong champion of nonviolent protests. Luthuli's recent acceptance of the possibility of violence aligns him with the black African consensus.
Violence under any circumstance is not a thing to be encouraged. It's not a thing to be encouraged. Now, if it comes, well, it's just like nations going to war. It's an unfortunate thing if nations have to go to war. But you can never anticipate and say, now, man, I'll work for war. Nobody works for violence. Nobody works for a war. But sometimes circumstances create that. And I can't predict circumstances and say, now, look, well, it's all right that this happens now. But in any case, I think as human beings, we must regret that we can't solve our differences and have to resort to violence and war and so on.
Raymond Kanuni, who heads the London office of the African National Congress in exile, underscores the organization's firm position.
We are going to use all forms necessary to get our freedom in South Africa, whether it is violence against those who are violent against us, whether it is violence against the property that those who reinforce economically the government, whether it is any type of violence possible. Our aim is to get our freedom, and we are prepared to get our freedom at whatever sacrifice necessary.
Z.B. Moletti, London representative of the PAC, speaks even in more specific terms.
The South African situation can only be resolved through bloodshed. That is, the African people taking arms against the oppressor, the foreign oppressor in the country. As for time, I think very soon.
The head of the Pan-Africanist Congress, Robert Sobukwe, has been jailed on Robben Island, the South African Bastille. The PAC represents the most militant of the younger generation who broke away from the African National Congress.
Robert Sobukwe, president of the PAC, was arrested on the 21st of March when the massacre at Sharpeville and Langa took place. He was subsequently charged and sentenced to 3 years, which term of imprisonment he served. After this, a special legislation was passed through Parliament to enable the government to keep him in jail indefinitely. And in the words of the Minister of Justice, Foster, when asked to release the man after serving his sentence, he said, "Not this one." And he continued that he would keep him this side of eternity.
Jail has also been the fate of Nelson Mandela, a giant among African patriots. Mandela succeeded Luthuli as active head of the African National Congress. After Sharpeville, he operated underground until he was caught in 1963 and tried for treason and sabotage. His remarks addressed to the court at the end of his trial have provided a credo for fellow freedom fighters.
The ideological creed of the ANC is, and always has been, the creed of African nationalism. It is not the concept of African nationalism expressed in the cry, "Drive the white man into the sea." The African nationalism for which the ANC stands is the concept of freedom and fulfillment for the African people in their own land. South Africa is the richest country in Africa and could be one of the richest countries in the world. But it is a land of extremes and remarkable contrasts. The whites enjoy what may well be the highest standard of living in the world, whilst the Africans live in poverty and misery. The complaint of Africans, however, is not only that they are poor and the whites are rich, but that the laws which are made by the whites are designed to preserve this situation. Africans want a share in the whole of South Africa. They want security and a stake in society. Above all, we want equal political rights, because without them, our disabilities will be permanent. I know this sounds revolutionary to the whites in this country, because the majority of voters will be Africans. This makes the white men fear democracy.
For someone who is white, South Africa can be an extremely pleasant place to visit and live. Fine climate, fine scenery. Here in Natal, whites enjoy the good life. They condone the racist system of apartheid. This is apartheid. It is unlawful for a white person and a non-white person to drink a cup of tea together in a tea room anywhere in South Africa unless they have obtained a special permit to do so. No African is entitled to acquire title to land anywhere in South Africa, nor is it the intention of the present government ever to grant such right to the African, even in his own reserves. No African lawfully residing in a town by virtue of a permit issued to him is entitled to have his wife and children residing with him. Any policeman is entitled, without warrant, to enter and search premises in a town in which he has reason to suspect that an African youth, 18 years of age or older, is committing the criminal offense of residing with his father without having the necessary permission to do so. Any person who is, in the opinion of the Minister of Justice, capable of supplying information of subversive activities may be detained in solitary confinement for a period of 90 days and for an unlimited number of 90-day periods thereafter. No court of law has the right of any circumstance to order the release of such persons. If an African sits on a bench in a public park, the bench being set apart for the exclusive use of white persons, he commits a criminal offense. The South African government's basic tactic in attacking black African leaders has been to equate African nationalism with communism. Africans, including Luthuli, have bitterly rejected this claim.
Sufficient to say that I'm not a communist, but one must say this. Being one of the leaders in the liberation movement, we don't discriminate against people because of their own political outlook or certain leanings. We don't say that this man is a rightist, this one is a socialist, this one is a communist. We don't want in the liberation movement because we have one common purpose, and that is freedom.
In reacting to the communist issue, journalist Nat Nakasa indicates the real and present danger relating to the Cold War to race war.
It is true, however, that all the troubles that the Africans have seen in South Africa have not come from communism. They have come from a country which professes to be living by standards of Christian Western civilization. Most Africans die without ever hearing about communism. All they hear about is the standards of Western Christian civilization, from which have accrued, as is well known right around the world, a lot of troubles, a lot of unpleasantnesses which the South African Africans have suffered. This also does mean that those who lead movements in South Africa know that they're unlikely to get assistance from the Christian Western civilized world. Therefore, they seek assistance from elsewhere.
Within South Africa, there have been reports of explosions and acts of sabotage at post offices and police stations. These incidents are believed to be the acts of organized groups. Because of the tight security maintained by the South African government, it is difficult to get information about what's really happening inside the country.
And most reports are obtained from those few who managed to escape or exiled from the country for political activity. To get more of the black viewpoint about how the brothers are taking care of business in South Africa and what the implications are, we invited 3 South African exiles to discuss with 2 Afro-Americans what it all means. The group consists of Professor Charles Hamilton, co-author with Stokely Carmichael of the book Black Power, Politics of Liberation, and currently a professor of political science at Columbia University. Peter Molotsi, the representative of the Pan-African Congress in this country. Willie Kositsili, noted South African writer and poet. Blyden Jackson, economic analyst on South Africa for the American Committee on Africa. And Hage Gingab, an exile from Southwest Africa, and the representative in the U.S. for SWAPO and the Southwest African People's Organization. And that's what the colonizer calls it. Africans call it Namibia.
Do you have any notions? I didn't want to move to this point right away, but let's do it and make the discussion that much more comfortable, perhaps. You mentioned awareness in this country. I think that we can talk now about the role that this country is playing in South Africa, economically particularly. And I think that once we get all that out, then it will be possible to talk in terms of particular specific kinds of action that we see as feasible to deal with this situation. Why don't you talk just briefly about what you are aware of, Blyden, in terms of the intense role of this country in the economics of South Africa?
Yeah, it's extremely important. The United States, and you have to view South Africa as a part of Africa as a whole to also get a real indication of what the United States' role in South Africa is doing. There are 2 ways that they deal with South Africa. One is governmental. The other is through corporate interests. Now, all of these people claim that they are neutral in the South African situation, but the case doesn't bear out. The United States finance in Africa is about $2 billion. of that $2 billion, $1 billion is in South Africa. Now, Africa is a vast continent, as you all know. They have $1 billion invested, just under $1 billion actually, in South Africa, and they have it invested in key areas. That is, South Africa, being aware of the moral condemnation of the world, struck out to make itself self-sufficient, so it wouldn't have to depend on anyone for anything. And the United States government has helped them to do just that. Automobiles, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, Willys are in. Oil is in a big way. Oil is the one thing that South Africa really needs, and it's Esso, Shell, Caltech, Chevron. These are the people that have gone in and developed South Africa so that now it is. They just struck what looks to be rich oil wells offshore, American companies for South Africa. The point that I'm trying to drive at is that with this $1 billion investment, the United States has committed itself to the support of the white, racist South African regime. The United States government has a tracking station, a space tracking station in South Africa. They have given South Africa a sugar quota where South Africa on many occasions has to buy sugar from independent African countries to sell in the United States to fulfill the quota. The quota, by the way, pays premium prices that are higher than the regular world prices. The point is that they buy the sugar from poor, independent black states, sell it to the United States at premium prices.
I think that we should not be naive to think that these policies are going to change through some process of self-enlightenment, you know. And I think that any black Americans who have such notions are just being naive about it. I might also add that my view is that the whole African problem in terms of U.S. foreign policy is not to be separated from, as far as I'm concerned, the position of black Americans in this country. It's very clear to me, and I'd like your reaction, any of you, that you're not, a people will not gain the level of respect and power until their worldwide interests are recognized. I think it's very clear that there are groups lobbying in this country for other countries, countries of their heritage and so forth. So black Americans who feel that this is not a problem for them primarily, I think are not being aware politically.
Well, in the past, actually, when African citizens were coming to this country, what was happening is that they were met by their White House mother or father, taken to the white area, kept there, and they were never meeting with the black people here. Now, I think that situation is changing now. Some of us, when we came here, said we can find our own friends. So this communication is now starting, and we are really working very hard to create this communication, and we hope also our black brothers can cooperate in this so that we can not talk again through intermediaries, but to deal directly.
When you see these things in a certain perspective, it just amazes you. The United States government has followed a policy of allowing refugees, political refugees, to come into the United States. Citizenship is granted almost immediately. In many cases, money is provided to get them started in business, to see that their children attend college. This policy applies everywhere but with refugees from South Africa, do you see, or any of the other areas in Southern Africa that are undergoing liberation wars. A refugee in exile who clearly shows that the South African government will murder him, not shoot him, but torture him to death, which is proven, factual evidence, presented in front of many international tribunals, that the South African government tortures to death political leaders. Here comes a South African, black, showing that he is in fact in exile and cannot go home. And he is made to report to the State Department every 90 days in some cases. He is constantly forced to renew his visa. He never knows if he's going to be asked to leave the country. And if he leaves the country, he has nowhere to go, as a rule. So that the situation, if you are a Hungarian refugee or a Czechoslovakian refugee or a Cuban refugee or any kind of refugee which is on their side of the ledger, then you are admitted to the United States, given citizenship, provided for in ways that some of us who are citizens are not even provided.
Yeah, I think it's important to also indicate how this country defines refugee. Also, I think it would be just very interesting to point out the institutionally racist nature of many of the policies of this society. It was pointed out earlier in our pre-discussion about the definition of a refugee. You might have something to add to this.
Yeah, we tried to approach State Department and find out about some of the brothers who even came here and finished their degrees and they cannot even get jobs and so on. So we asked for this, and then we were told, Southern Africans do not qualify here as refugees, because refugee means somebody who ran away from communist countries, or from Middle Eastern crisis, or from natural calamity. Those three categories are regarded here as refugees. Now, Southern Africans do not fall under that category. That's what we were told.
So the fact that they can prove that the South African government is going to murder them, unfortunately, that's not a good enough...
It's not considered a calamity or anything of that nature, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's not natural.
Yeah, because of what is involved in terms of the expansion, you might say, of European and American imperialism, their interests in South, pure material interests, the measures that the whites in South Africa take in relation to the black population, to see to it that the white wealth, that white profits within the country are not threatened, and that they do not intend, there is no possible way of even slightly seeing them as intending to change that situation. In other words, the relations of who's getting all the material wealth. So that the only way to change the situation is for us in South Africa to violently break that slave-master relationship.
At one time, I take it then that what you're suggesting is that at one point there was a rather wide view that relief, remedies, reform measures could come from the international scene through the UN, through
the
Commonwealth of Nations and so forth, but not now. What would you conceive to be, in terms of this new thinking about the armed struggle, the feasibility of it? How would you assess, either of you, or any of you, the feasibility of it at this point in terms of what you find or know about with organized groups in liberation groups in South Africa?
Well, we, of course, as an organization, take the position exactly that our fate is simply limited. We have no choice in this matter. So we do have to launch an armed struggle because it is the only way out. But how do we see it now? Really, there are certain things that I cannot disclose, in a conversation of this type. But I can briefly indicate what is fairly well known and irrefutable. I only see the feasibility of an armed struggle really based on our state of readiness, how organized we are. And my knowledge has been that organization is difficult along these lines, but we have made a start. And in this respect, I speak for the entire liberatory movement in South Africa, and this cuts across party political affiliations. So I see it as a protracted struggle, in the sense that the oppressive regime itself will be counteracting us. And we ourselves are not expecting an easy way out of this situation, but we just have no choice to go on in this way.
I think eventually the struggle will be successful. Only thing we could ask maybe the outside world to do is to leave us alone to fight. Because if we are going to tackle South Africa, we are going to be successful. If South Africa doesn't get help from her friends in the Western world. Now, this is maybe where we have to warn our black brothers here not to make the same mistake they made in Vietnam, that the United States shouldn't come and tell them that they are fighting communists in Southern Africa. Therefore, they should send the army there and fight against the communists. And of course, what they will refer to that time as communists would be the black nationalists. So therefore, it would be a good message to the black brothers to know when that time comes that actually people who are fighting are black Africans against the oppressors and the international imperialism.
I must say that we, of course, expect this type of solidarity from the black people in this country for historic reasons, for obvious historic reasons. And also because we visualize ourselves not only as fighting for our territorial independence, but we really are fighting for the total liberation of the continent. And also, we firmly believe that if we succeed, all people of color everywhere, peoples of African descent, have won their freedom, if we really do it. Now, because of the complexity of the situation, and because of the varied nature of the type of enemy we are facing, we are facing the South African regime on the face of it. We are facing some capitalists there on the face of it. But as a matter of fact, we are facing the entire network, the NATO complex. So that in the light of the very size of the enemy we are facing and the sophisticated nature of its weapons and its ramifications, we are really entitled to support of the black brothers in this country particularly, and of the American people in general.
Let's be additionally candid here and talk about, when you use the word we, let's just talk about this for a second. What is the state of what we might call, what has been called Pan-Africanism now, as opposed to what we might call factionalism?
I hadn't even set out to say we also stand out for the total freedom of the continent. That does mean that we accept Pan-Africanism as the key. But as a matter of fact, and in practice, we as organizations in exile have had our own problems, which indicated to us that Pan-Africanism has begun to suffer some, at certain areas and levels, some slowdowns. This has happened. For one thing, we operate within the territory of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity. Now, this is fairly well known that we have not been in a position as movements to get all what we need, something like the tools. And we have been told by the leaders of the OAU itself that some African states have not honored their obligations in this respect. Now, this has resulted, of course, in difficulties on our part, because if the leadership of any given organization is unable to deliver the goods to its following, then of course the energy is turned inward. The followers begin to eat the leaders, they begin to devour them, and the leaders begin to crack down because of multiplying frustrations. So this does also result in splits and splinter groups, so that the solidity of the movement that set out originally to achieve certain things is affected by this weakening of the Pan-African front. It does happen. These are our problems.
I think it's very clear that we have a lot of examples in this country about how different groups push interests of other countries, particularly the American Jews, how they support morally, financially, and otherwise the battles of Israel in the Mideast.
You see, that's the point. See, it's not just a cultural struggle. The cultural part is important for us as Afro-Americans, but it's the political, economic part that's the key, the development of Africa. For instance, you guys can use certain kinds of support that the average Afro-American could get across to you. What, for instance, could you use most from the black community?
From the black community in this country, we cannot overemphasize the need by our people and organizations in exile for clothing, for medicine.
But what are you going to do with clothing? I mean,
we have people
in Africa.
We have people who are in exile, who are away from South Africa. And these people do need clothing because as revolutionists, they have to, as far as possible, appear like ordinary people. And besides, also in Africa, it does become cold, so people do need clothing.
Right, but what about the guy, say, who doesn't want to send clothes, but who might want to send a gun?
Fine, this will need.
How does he send it? I mean, I don't know if we can get into that, but it seems to me that this is what I would be interested in, and that's why I'm involved in Africa. What does the average guy do besides clothing, for instance?
No, I have repeatedly said that not only is it clothing, but it also money. We need money to acquire these things. I think it would be upset on our part to say the men must give us money. I think what we need, I mean, a gun as such, what we need is money because we know where to get the gun. You see, the gun is not a problem. What is a problem is the money to use in securing this type of thing, of assistance.
So what we really have then is what's needed is medicine, money, clothing, I'm sure books. Books can be used.
Books could be used.
But in addition, we have to get off the cultural kick to some degree, and we got to say that what we need, correct me now if I'm wrong,
yes.
What we really need is a political awareness in addition to a cultural awakening about what's happening. I mean, many black brothers and sisters will say, man, Congress don't deal with it. And they don't, we don't. You brothers know that. But the point is, in terms of you guys, if we had a lobby in Washington, see, are you in agreement that a lobby by black people in Washington would mean anything?
I'm very skeptical about that.
Why?
First of all, because the people in Washington have in their hearts the interests of whites in South Africa.
Can that be changed, Willie?
I think it can be changed by armed struggle. I don't think any moral
suasion. We're talking about this country.
In this country, you mean? I doubt it very much. I think what it would finally amount to might be, if it is comfortable for those congressmen to deal with whatever it is to some degree, they would do it.
Well, now, wait a minute. Wait.
No,
You've
no,
always
I
argued for a lobby.
I have a different view on this.
Yeah, I know. What is it?
I want to express this quite openly. Whereas it may not be immediately beneficial for the local people, for our brothers in this country to use Congress, it does mean a lot to us. For instance, we would have, we do desire a lobby there.
But that's not Willie's point.
That's exactly
Willie's
what I'm
point is that we are going to have to, unless it's comfortable for them. Sure, we recognize that if Congress is going to do something, then it would be useful for you and fine. But he says they're not going to do it.
No, we want it to be uncomfortable for the congressman.
There should be a take for instance a university crisis here. When people are going, students are going and begging and asking to do this and this, they didn't act. They were just listening and saying, yes, we are going to do it. But we don't, of course, just say that it should be just a matter of taking a bus load and just going every day and repeat it. For instance, South African missionaries here, there are many places, even UN could be disrupted sometimes, if worse comes to worse. Because we want blacks to be so mobilized that when we can call on their aid, and we will be very soon ready. As long as South Africa occupies my country, I may organize something to even occupy their buildings here until they leave. So this kind of help we will need.
Okay, let me ask you something else, which I'm sure every brother who's interested. What about the guy who wants to come and fight with you? Now, you know, I speak to you about many brothers who come to me and say that they want to go and fight. What about that guy? What does he do? That's an offer of aid. What do you do with him?
Well, he has to come through our organizational structure, because this does create problems. If people just go into Africa in the belief that because they are black, they'll just be accepted, this is erroneous, because in Africa, people are security conscious. And in matters of security, we have had black people being used.
But you're saying that the PAC will take American blacks. Is that what you're saying?
Through our proper organization.
And what about you?
I will say yes, but our black brother has to come and fight after I have first gone, after all Namibians have first died for their own country.
So you're saying that
they have, as long as I'm still sitting here and talking, I wouldn't like any brother to go and fight there, my struggle. But I have to first go and die myself, and when, of course, this time will come when we are going to ask for help from outside. And our brothers will be the first one we will call upon.
Well, we're running out of time, and I think that there is much more to say on this subject. But we're very pleased that you came to Black Journal tonight. We thank you very much, all of you.
I still think that the analogy of Southern Africa becoming another Vietnam, as you were pointing out, Professor, and the need for blacks to be aware and not get caught up in the trap.
One of the strongest points that we might gain from a discussion of this sort is that although there is a geographical distance between blacks in South Africa and Afro-Americans, the problems that face black people everywhere in most of Western civilization are essentially the same. We are a colonized people, oppressed by racist institutions created by whites. In both groups, whether here or in South Africa, black people are struggling toward liberation. Most discussions like this are taking place, and the bonds between us are growing. Photographs of Ernest Cole. Powerful, brothers and sisters, powerful. The following item by this time is not a news flash. White South African doctor Philip Bleiberg, the longest living heart transplant patient, died on Saturday, August 16th. His death occurred 18 months after the transplant operation. We'd like the black community to remember that for those 18 months, Dr. Bleiberg's body functioned through the heart of a Cape Town colored, in other words, a black man. South Africa strikes again. Can you dig that, baby?
Before we sign off, Lou, the National Association of Television and Radio Announcers has awarded Black Journal this trophy for outstanding work in the field of television programming.
Beautiful.
Your cards and letters help to make this possible, ladies and gentlemen, and we appreciate the continuing support the association is giving us. Awards help, and we do appreciate them, but it's also correspondence that helps to keep us on the air. We still need your support, so send your letters and cards into Black Journal, NET, 10 Columbus Circle, New York, 10019.
Well, that's it, brothers and sisters. Another edition of Black Journal. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, I'm Lou House with William Greaves. One gay, y'all.
This is NET, the Public Television Network.